The very definition of politics has evolved over time, and never more so than in recent years. Why do we need to understand government? The answer to that is to decide and understand who benefits or not in society. Identifying these power relationships is germane to discerning who exactly will benefit, why, and how. Identifying the processes of administering these advantages helps us to gain an operational perspective of day-to-day outcomes of our government. Thus, the theories and practices of our government are essential to a comprehensive view of it. The scope of this video will help you to identify the benefits of civic engagement and political participation, discuss how demographic factors impact political participation, specifically through voting. The 6 main government functions are enumerated. Both structures of government as well as types of government are given. The origins of democracy in America will be described as to their development through the influence of religious beliefs as interpreted through the effect of Reformation. And finally is a description of the classic version of the political ideological spectrum is explained. The place of technology in understanding of our government is conspicuous. With technology, we know both how people communicate and how governments provide information. With our faster computers, internet access, and micro-targeting, our sources are often found within social media sites or blogs. But as we contextualize politics and government today, debates occur about the size and role of government, the fostering of economic development, and the challenging issues of healthcare and law enforcement. How do we feel about government today? As evidenced in citizen attitude, many people are cynical, untrusting, don't believe efficacy or their ability to affect change is present. This often brings about lower voter turnout. There are benefits to civic engagement as it presents opportunities for greater knowledge, better communication, and advocacy of one's interests. Typically, civic engagement by citizens benefits local communities, states, and the country. Political participation is another type of engagement, as citizens are active in a broad range of exercises to express themselves, their ideas, and opinions. Some examples of this could include letter writing to advocate certain policies, facilitating voter registration, protesting, and attending government meetings or hearings, and being active in a particular political party. Let's talk about some of the demographic factors evident in voter turnout and participation. According to Pew Research and numerous other sources, demographic factors such as age, race, gender, religious views all impact voter turnout. First, voters are aging, and 52% of registered voters are over 50 years old. Voters in this age bracket tend to be conservative and vote Republican. In the 2020 presidential election, 69% of voters were non-Hispanic, white Americans. However, their share of registered voters is diminishing and declined from 85% in 1996 to around 69% just ahead of our last presidential election. The graph demonstrates the decreasing effect of the white non-Hispanic voter. Let's progress to our discussion of government functions. The government creates and implements policies and laws to guide our conduct as a nation as it provides the leadership, through the representation of its citizens, of course, and participates in our lives. To preserve order and stability is a function that in more recent times has become increasingly challenging because of social justice issues. Numerous factions of opinions and ideologies compete in a war of sorts to determine what is the right for us as a nation to do, and how do we go about doing it. The next function requires the country to establish and maintain a legal system. Here we see laws and policies which were created to set boundaries of behavior. Some are indicative of what we can do, and some are more focused on what we cannot do. Using the Constitution as its foundation, enforcement becomes a way to intermingle these functions. That is to say, to maintain the legal system and preserve order to create stability through local, state, and national authorities, while the judicial system administers justice and imposes penalties. In theory, this combination should represent reverential discourse, where we respect each other fully and appreciate each other's moral worth. To our advantage, the government functions to provide services. This is the area where we interact with our government every day through such services as meat inspection, approval of medications, the provision of our system of roads, transportation and infrastructure, healthcare, and food security. The government has an obligation to raise the money it sets out to spend. This means bringing in revenue through various methods such as taxation. Some taxations, for example, include income tax, property tax, sales tax, and sin taxes, or taxes against the purchase of an item which is considered undesirable or harmful to the consumer. According to some, preparing the next generation to meet its obligations by participating civically and politically helps to strengthen our values and opinions about the responsibilities and functions of government. These are considered the development and evolution of cultural norms and standards for our fundamental values. Something to consider here is, do you believe the government to be responsible for this? Or do you tend to hold the opinion that these ideological developments should be founded in family or religious paradigms? How do you believe your ideas about government and politics are influenced? Finally is the challenge of protecting the citizenry by providing a national defense. External threats have been and will be something about which our country must remain vigilant. Governments are classified both by type as well as by structure. Government structures include, for example, the totalitarian government, which theoretically allows for no individual freedom and seeks to subordinate all aspects of an individual to the authority of the state, and is considered to be absolute as well as an oppressive single-party government. There are no rights or freedoms except those extended by the ruler or the party. Some governments have strong powers, but are held in check by societal forces. These are tagged as authoritarian. There are three forms of authoritarian rule, that is, military rule, single-party rule, and personal rule or dictatorships, or it could be a manifestation of some combination of all of these forms of rule. A government structured by law, such as the Constitution, provides for a limited government so that the rights of the people are protected. These might be democracies or they could be monarchies. This is referred to as constitutionalism. Let's watch and listen as Florida Virtual School discusses governments by type.
You know, there are three main types of governments around the world: democracies, oligarchies, and autocracies. You can tell the type by who has decision-making power. Let's take a closer look. In a democracy, everyone in a community has decision-making power. In a direct democracy, everyone gets to vote on every major decision. This is best for small groups and only works if everyone agrees to accept the decision with the most votes. In an indirect democracy, also known as a representative democracy or a republic, communities elect individuals they believe will make the best decisions for the group. If they don't, the community can elect new representatives. The United States is an example of an indirect democracy. In an oligarchy, a small group of leaders hold decision-making power for an entire community. These leaders are usually part of the same political party. This means they run the government based on their party's ideas. And it doesn't matter if people disagree with them, since the governed people don't have decision-making power. In an autocracy, one person holds all the decision-making power for a community. There are a few different types of autocracies. A monarchy is an autocracy run by a queen or king. Monarchs rule for life and are hereditary, meaning only family members can become the new queen or king. In an absolute monarchy, there is a single ruler with no formal limits on power. In a constitutional monarchy, the monarch is limited by a constitution and laws. A dictatorship is an autocracy where one person rules the nation by force, making all government decisions, sometimes with the help of advisors.
So how did the ideas of democracy for America surface? Though the footprint of the ancient Greeks are evident in our ideas of democracy, where people can decide on public issues through majority rule, many of our roots are grounded in the Judeo-Christian tradition as well as the English common law. Of particular note was the influence of the Protestant Reformation brought about by German monk Martin Luther in the 16th century. The idea that a person could have direct communication with God and could freely self-interpret the Bible was the genesis of the realization that if people could talk directly to God, surely they are also capable of self-governing. As the American Revolution was becoming a viable scheme, there was the stance that we are endowed by our Creator with unalienable right and should also be free to form a government. Many settlers had come to America seeking the right to worship, as was their choice. So you can see that Martin Luther set off a reformation wrapped in validating one's individualism. Let's watch this video from Prager University as they explain the importance of the Reformation to our journey towards independence.
Luther believed there should be no separation between the Bible and the believer. Every individual should have access to the Word of God, Luther contended, as any priest did, or even the Pope. We take this view for granted now, but in the 16th century it was a radical concept. And here's why. For more than 1,000 years, the Church had been the dominant religious and political authority in Europe. It alone taught Christians how to understand the Bible. Luther was now challenging the very basis of this authority. Not surprisingly, the Church didn't take it well. What began as a squabble between a bold monk and the Catholic hierarchy soon developed into a titanic and bloody struggle that split Europe into opposing religious factions. But the consequences of Luther's ideas extended far beyond a religious dispute. It's not an exaggeration to say that as a result of Luther's ideas, the modern individual was born, a free actor, endowed with God-given rights that exist independent of government or any other institution. Each person could find those rights by reading and interpreting the Bible for himself. Of course, to do that, you had to be able to read the Bible, and throughout the first millennium right up until Luther's day, only a very few people could. Books, including the Bible, were all handwritten, a process usually that took months. This made books rare and expensive. Furthermore, most Bibles were written in Latin, the language of the Church, a language familiar only to the clergy and educated elite. This exclusivity was one of the many ways in which the Church maintained its power. Luther answered this problem by translating the Bible into everyday German so that anyone could read it. But out of all this carnage, many positive changes came too. The Protestant empowerment of the individual led to capitalism and the Enlightenment, just to name two byproducts of Luther's protest. The American Revolution, with its idea that individuals endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights should be free to form their own government, was another. Of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence, all but one was a Protestant. Pronouncing a verdict on an epoch as significant as the Reformation is very difficult. Perhaps it's best not even to try. But we can say this: no other single figure made more of an impact on the modern world than the German monk, Martin Luther.
Finally, let's examine a traditional view of the ideological spectrum by discussing the different labels and what each one represents based on that label's expected role of government. Moving from left to right on the spectrum, we will start with those who invite a strong role of government into their lives. This role of government is often represented by government rule and economic outcomes. Different terms have been more recently applied to this side of the spectrum, including far left. But suffice to say, it is beyond the position of standard leftist ideology. Some useful criteria for understanding might be a rejection of the underlying socioeconomic structure of contemporary capitalism and a redistribution of resources. The next tick to the right is liberalism. In this paradigm, our government action should be that of promoting opportunity. More contemporarily, the government should work to bring about justice and opportunity. Individual rights, such as the right to own property, is supported, but also is the notion that government is within its rights to correct what is termed by some as defects of capitalism, while affording access to health care, housing, and education for all citizens. Criticisms of liberalism are too much government reliance, high taxes, and a bureaucratic view of operation. A moderate political view is demonstrated obviously in the middle of this line, and one might say this is where bipartisan decisions often take place. Conservatism traditionally believes in limited government intrusion, support of business, strong national defense, competitive markets, free and fair trade, and family values. They also believe that families and charities should take care of those in need rather than government. Criticisms of conservatism includes being at odds with labor unions and being in favor of a deregulatory business climate. Conservatives, by some account, do not address social justice issues such as racism, sexism, and economic equality. Finally, and all the way to the right, is libertarianism, which supports no government role whatsoever, with absolute economic and social freedom. So, no government regulations and no limitations on fundamental rights. Keep in mind that across governmental boundaries, as well as over time, political labels have taken on different meanings. There are some who say that the left-right paradigm is becoming increasingly meaningless, and a new, more relevant spectrum is one of personal freedom versus state power. But the biggest difference is between those that separate conservative and liberal groups.